Hello sports fans, welcome to Super Sports Central. Today, we're going to be going over my Week 15 college football rankings. So we'll start off by briefly recapping my rankings from last week and what those teams did in Week 14. Last week at number 10, I had Notre Dame. They easily beat Stanford 49-20. 9th, I had Alabama. They held off Auburn winning 27-20. 8th was Oklahoma. They beat LSU 17-13. 7th, I had Texas Tech. They easily beat West Virginia 49-0. 6th, I had Ole Miss. They beat Mississippi State 38-19. Number 5 was Oregon. They beat Washington 26-14. 4th, I had Georgia. They beat Georgia Tech 16-9. 3rd, I had Texas A&M. They lost to Texas, losing 27-17. 2nd was Indiana. They easily beat Purdue 56-3. And number 1 was Ohio State, and they beat Michigan 27-9. But getting into this week's rankings, beating things at number 10, I've got Notre Dame. So Notre Dame remains here at number 10 after they beat Stanford pretty easily 49-20. And this game is actually a lot more one-sided than the final score may look. Because, 49-20 is still a pretty dominant win. But Notre Dame, they're up 42-6 entering the fourth quarter before Stanford scored a couple garbage time touchdowns. But this is a pretty good game for Notre Dame. The offense was great, putting up 49 points. And quarterback C.J. Carr is very solid with 205 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Notre Dame, they also ran the football very effectively, rushing for 187 yards and 4 scores. Although, Jeremiah Love did get hurt in this game, but he seems to be okay and actually returned to the game for a few plays. And he probably would have played more if the game wasn't a blowout. Although, obviously, because he got hurt and the game was a blowout, he didn't put up insane numbers, which definitely doesn't help his Heisman case, as he ran for just 66 yards and a score. Although, it might also not hurt his case, because none of the other Heisman contenders truly had great games. And then the defense for Notre Dame, they're also great. They ended up allowing 20 points, but most of those were just garbage time points. And overall, the defense for Notre Dame played pretty well. But Notre Dame, they end the season on a 10-game winning streak. I've got them at number 10. I do think they should make the playoff, but they're definitely a bubble team. Going to be interesting to see what happens. 9th, I've got Alabama. So Alabama, they remain at number 9 after they beat Auburn by a score of 27-20. And this wasn't a great game for Alabama. Obviously, they got the win, but they didn't play that well. They got off to a great start. They were up 17-0, but then they let Auburn back into the game. They tied the game at 20 before Alabama scored the game-winning touchdown to win 27-20. But it seemed like Auburn was trying to actively lose this game because all their drops, all their fumbles, they were not helping themselves, and that's a big part of what allowed Alabama to get the win. But the offense for Alabama wasn't very good. They ran the football well for the first time all year, rushing for 158 yards and 4.2 yards per carry, but the pass game was pretty bad, as Ty Simpson threw 3 touchdowns, although he went just 19 of 35 for 122 yards. And all 3 touchdown passes actually went to receiver Isaiah Horton. But the pass game, not great for Alabama. Now, the defense for Alabama, they were pretty solid, as they allowed just 20 points and also forced 2 turnovers. But it wasn't the prettiest win for Alabama. It's usually not pretty when they go to Jordan-Hare Stadium. Obviously, that was true once again. But I do have Alabama remaining at number 9. 8th, I have Oklahoma. So Oklahoma, they remain at number 8 after they beat LSU by a score of 17-13. But this was not a good game for Oklahoma, especially offensively. And I'm very worried about this offense heading towards the playoffs, and I just don't think they're that good. But the offense for Oklahoma, they only put up 17 points, and quarterback John Mateer was pretty bad. Now, he did throw for over 300 yards, as he finished the game with 319 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions, but, he just did not look good. Now, Oklahoma, they also didn't run the football effectively, as they ran for 75 yards on 2.7 yards per carry. So, definitely a big problem for the offense. Now, the defense for Oklahoma, they were great as usual, as they allowed just 13 points and under 200 total yards. But, not a great game for Oklahoma. They got the win. It wasn't a pretty win, but they got a win, and I've got them at number 8. But I could understand if you do want to reorder 8, 9, and 10 with Oklahoma, Notre Dame, and Alabama. Now, obviously, I have Oklahoma at 8, Alabama 9, Notre Dame 10. The committee's got Oklahoma 8, Notre Dame 9, Alabama 10. And if you have the way the committee has, I can definitely understand jumping Notre Dame over Oklahoma and going Notre Dame 8, Oklahoma 9, Alabama 10. I can definitely understand that. Obviously, the way I had it with Oklahoma, then Alabama, then Notre Dame, I just keep it how I have it, but I can definitely understand if you want to reshuffle those. But I got Oklahoma at number 8. 7th, I've got Texas Tech. So Texas Tech, they remain at number 7 after they destroyed West Virginia 49-0. And this was an easy win for Texas Tech. The offense was great, putting up 49 points, and they were great through the air and on the ground. But quarterback Baron Morton had a nice game, throwing for 310 yards and 3 scores. And wide receiver Caleb Douglas also put up big numbers with 5 catches for 127 yards, and he found the end zone twice. And then running the football for Texas Tech, they were also great, with 188 yards and 2 scores. And Texas Tech, they also tried to get linebacker Jacob Rodriguez some more touchdowns to help his Heisman case, and he did run for a score, but then they tried to have him throw a touchdown, and instead of throwing a touchdown, he threw a pick. And then speaking of Jacob Rodriguez and the Texas Tech defense, they were great. They allowed just 180 yards, they got 2 turnovers, also 4 sacks, and they also shut out an opponent for the second time this season. But it's another dominant win for Texas Tech. I think they're a lock for the college football playoff. Next week they face BYU in the Big 12 title game. 6th, I've got Ole Miss. So Ole Miss, they've remained at number 6 after they beat Mississippi State 38-19. And this was another good game for Ole Miss. The offense played well, and Trinidad Chambliss had a huge game, as he threw over 359 yards and 4 touchdowns. And Trinidad Chambliss actually has over 300 passing yards in 7 of his 10 starts so far this season. And then running the football for Ole Miss, they're also great, as Kawan Lacey ran for 143 yards and a score, and Ole Miss as a team ran for 186. And then the defense for Ole Miss, they're also pretty good, as they got just 18 points, although they did struggle to stop the run, especially the quarterback run, as they ended up allowing 262 rushing yards, 173 of them from the quarterback. But it's still a good win for Ole Miss. They won the Egg Bowl. They're now 11-1. They're a lock for the college football playoff. But obviously the big thing with Ole Miss now is, what is Lane Kiffin doing? Because he seems to keep just pushing this decision back and back and back. Although it definitely does seem like he's going to LSU. But I've got Ole Miss at number 6. Number 5, I have Oregon. So Oregon remains at number 5 after they beat Washington pretty easily by a score of 26-14. And this is a pretty solid win because they were pretty much in control of this game the entire way. But the offense for Oregon looked pretty good. Dante Moore had a nice game, throwing for 286 yards and a touchdown. And receiver Malik Benson was great, with 5 catches for 102 yards and a score. Now, it's a good thing the pass game was great because the run game for Oregon wasn't amazing, as they ran for just 106 yards and a score on 2.5 yards per carry. And then the defense for Oregon, they're also great, as they held a high-scoring Washington offense to just 14 points, while also getting 4 sacks and forcing a couple turnovers. But it's a good win for Oregon. They're now 11-1, another walk for the college football playoff, and I've got Oregon at number 5. Coming in at number 4, I've got Texas A&M. So Texas A&M, they drop a spot to number 4 after they lost their first game of the season, losing to Texas by a score of 27-17. And this wasn't a great game for Texas A&M. They were okay in the first half, actually leading 10-3 at the half, but then they were not good in the second half, as in the second half they got outscored 24-7. And even when they pulled to within 3 in the second half, the defense couldn't get a stop, and they allowed a touchdown 4 plays later. But the offense for Texas A&M, they weren't great. Marcel Reed threw for just 180 yards, and he also had 2 pretty bad interceptions late in the game. And A&M also didn't have much of a run game outside of Marcel Reed scrambling. And then defensively for Texas A&M, they weren't great. They allowed 24 of their 27 points in the second half, and they also couldn't stop the run, allowing 218 rushing yards and over 6 yards per carry. But it was not a good performance for Texas A&M. It is their first loss of the season, and when you're looking at their resume overall, they're still a very good team. It's only dropping a spot from number 3 to number 4, but I've got Texas A&M at number 4. 3rd, I have Georgia. So Georgia, they moved up a spot to number 3 as a result of the A&M loss, but Georgia, they didn't play that well, because they only beat Georgia Tech 16-9. Now, the offense for Georgia was not good. They only scored 1 offensive touchdown, they settled for a lot of field goals, and they only put up 16 points against a Georgia Tech defense that was not playing well. But Gunnar Stockton was pretty bad, as he completed just 11 of his 21 passes for 70 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Now, Georgia did run the football pretty effectively, as they ran for 190 yards. And then defensively for Georgia, they were also great, as they held a great Georgia Tech offense to just 9 points and 250 total yards. But not a great win for Georgia, but they got the win, and they'll play Alabama in the SEC title game next week. I've got Georgia at number 3. 2nd, I've got Indiana. So Indiana, they remain at number 2 after they beat Purdue by a score of 56-3. And this was an easy win for Indiana. The offense was great, putting up 56 points, and they were insane running the football, rushing for 355 yards and 5 touchdowns. But while the run game was great, they didn't throw the ball too effectively, as Fernando Mendoza might have put himself out of the Heisman, as he completed just 8 of 15 passes for 117 yards and 2 scores. And then the defense for Indiana, they were great. They allowed just 3 points and forced 2 turnovers. But it's another easy win for Indiana. They've remained undefeated as they're 12-0, and they've remained at number 2. And coming in at number 1, I've got Ohio State. So Ohio State, they've remained at number 1 after they finally beat Michigan by a score of 27-9. And this is a pretty good game for Ohio State, although they did do it off to a pretty slow start, because they allowed Michigan to kick a field goal on their first drive, then Julian Sain threw a pretty bad pick, but the defense held them to 3, and from that point on, it was pretty much all Ohio State. But the offense for Ohio State, they look pretty good. Julian Sain bounced back from that early interception and finished with 233 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. And Ohio State, they ran the football very effectively, especially in the second half, as they ended up running for 186 yards, 117 of them from Bo Jackson. Then the defense for Ohio State, they also played well. They didn't allow a touchdown and allowed just 9 points. But Ohio State, they finally beat Michigan after a 4-game losing streak, and after the win, Ohio State, they've remained at 1. And moving on to my updated college football playoff predictions, so not a whole ton has changed, but there is a few changes. So my 1 seed remains Ohio State, 13-0, winning the Big Ten. 2 seed I have Indiana at 12-1. My 3 seed, I have Georgia winning the SEC at 12-1. I have no idea who wins the SEC championship. I'll just take a guess and say Georgia for now. My 4 seed is Texas A&M at 11-1. I still do think they'll get the first round bye because I don't really think they're going to drop very far. 5 seed, I've got Texas Tech at 12-1, winning the Big 12. 6 seed, I've got Ole Miss at 11-1. So Ole Miss, they're an interesting one because obviously they're definitely a playoff team. They're 11-1, but I am interested to see if the committee does end up dropping them at all if Lane Kiffin decides he's leaving, which seems pretty likely at this point. Because then it creates a similar situation to what happened with Florida State a few years ago, although obviously that was their quarterback, not their coach. But Florida State shouldn't have fallen. I don't think Ole Miss should fall, but just something to keep an eye on. My 7th seed, I've got Oregon at 11-1. 8th seed is Oklahoma at 10-2. 9th seed, I've got Notre Dame at 10-2. And 10th seed, I've got Alabama at 10-3. So Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Alabama, obviously I talked about them before, but it's very interesting. I don't think they're all locks for the playoff, and if BYU wins the Big 12, one of them is definitely going to miss. And something else to keep an eye on is Alabama going to drop if they lose the SEC title game? Now, the committee doesn't like to punish teams for losing a conference championship game because they don't want to punish them for playing an extra game, but it's just something to keep an eye on. And then the 11th seed, I've got Virginia. So the ACC champion probably going to be here at 11, although it's not a guarantee because the ACC championship between Virginia and Duke is going to be 8-5 if they win, and that is not a playoff team. So, I mean, technically we could see 2 group of 5 teams with the winner of the American and James Madison. But I'm going to take a guess with the ACC champion and say Virginia. Obviously, I'll have an official prediction when I do my predictions video later in the week, but for now, I'll say Virginia. And then the 12th seed, the group of 5 champion, I'll say Tulane. They play North Texas. Again, that's another game that can definitely go either way. But I'll say Tulane for now. I've had them here for the past couple weeks. I'll just stick with them. But those are my Week 15 college ball rankings. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, turn on notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible, and I will see you in the next video.